Hi everyone, this is Lisa Tilson and welcome to my channel. This video today is part of a hop with Hero Arts to celebrate their spring collection. And for my card today, I'm going to be doing some watercolouring using their Reactive inks. So let's take a look at the stamp set that I'm going to be using. This is the Here For You stamp set. It has 3 floral images, it has a number of sentiments, and it also has an accent stamp, that one there up on the top left, which you can use to add some dots into your card design. And I'm going to be using the Reactive ink cubes to watercolour today. I'm using Creamsicle Taffy, Lemon Drop, Key Lime Fizz, Green Apple and Pool Party. Okay, so I'm going to start off by stamping my 2 floral images, so just removing those from the packaging, and I'm going to place them down onto a panel of Hero Arts Luxe watercolour cardstock. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick those up with the lid of my Misty. And I'm going to apply my ink, and today I'm going to be using Hero Arts Intensified Black ink. So I am going to stamp these a number of times because the cardstock is textured. I want to make sure that I get a really clear black outline. So just pressing that down the first time, and I do end up reapplying my ink a couple more times and pressing that down. As you can see there's a little section on the left hand side where I haven't inked up the stamp properly, or it hasn't transferred properly. So adding a little bit of elbow grease into the mix just to make sure that I get a really nice impression. Okay, so for the watercolouring, I'm going to take all 6 of those ink cubes and I'm just going to smush down some of each colour onto the right hand side of my glass media mat, and I'm going to be using a water brush for my watercolouring today. So I'm starting off by adding Key Lime Fizz onto all 3 of the leaves and onto the stem, and I will work in layers for most of the watercolouring, letting each layer dry in between, but there are some times when I actually apply ink on top of ink that hasn't dried, so that's a bit more of a wet on wet technique. Just do whatever works for you. I do find it easier to let the layers dry in between and then go in and add another layer on top and then just blend that out. But really you can do wet on dry or wet on wet, whatever you feel most comfortable with. So just making sure I've filled in all those little areas with my lightest green. So whilst that first layer is drying on the leaves, I'm going to start work on my flower petals. So for these I'm going to start off by using Taffy Reactive ink. So I've picked some up with my water brush and I've applied that to the petal, and I dab off my brush in between and then I just blend out that colour so that it goes to a much paler version of that pink, and I'm going to continue to do that with all the petals. And I look slightly awkward here as I'm trying to apply my ink to that top petal. If I wasn't filming this, I would turn my cardstock around and work my way around the petals that way by turning the cardstock. But I don't want to end up making anyone feel ill, so I'm trying to keep the paper as still as I can, but it does mean that sometimes I look a little bit awkward while I'm just applying that ink. So that finishes the first layer of pink on the petals. Now I'm going to go in with Green Apple, and this is going to provide a little bit of contrast on some areas of my leaves. So I'm just adding that to the sort of right hand side, or what I would think of as the lower section of that leaf. I don't tend to worry about light source or anything like that. I just colour so that I give my image some kind of variation. So a really small part on that stem to get some ink into, but this is a fine tip brush, so it works pretty well. So now that those petals have almost dried, I'm going to go in with a little bit of creamsicle. This is just to add a little bit of orange into that pink. Petals are often multicoloured when you look at them in detail rather than being one flat shade. So as I think pink and orange look really nice together, and I do have a rose in my garden that has pink petals with orange tinges in it, so I'm kind of working with that in mind and just making sure I add a little bit of orange into those pink areas. And I also did the center of the flower using lemon drop, and I'm now just going in with some taffy to fill out and complete all of those other petals. So I have sped this up a little bit as it does take quite a while, and I didn't want the video to be over long. Each time I add that colour into an area, I tap my brush off and then blend it out. So back to the leaves again, they are almost dry, so I'm going in now with an extra layer of the green apple, and I'm also going to add in a tiny little bit of pool party as well, just to give those a little bit more variation in colour. It's a really pretty blue pool party, and I think it tones very well with the green apple and the key lime fizz, and it just makes those leaves look a little bit different with a touch of blue in them. And some leaves definitely do have a little touch of blue in them, particularly if they come from tropical islands. So I like to add a little blue into mine now and again. So just going through, adding some more orange now into the flower centre, just to give that a little bit more depth. So going back in again with a little bit more of the pink and the orange, making sure that I blend that out each time with some clear water. Now I noticed that I had a little bit of green ink outside of the leaf, so I'm just squeezing a tiny bit of water down on top of that, and I'm going to dab that up with a paper towel just to try and lift that colour. And I add a little bit more water and I dab it off again just to make sure that I haven't got any outside of that line. And now I am going to add some ultra pink dye ink into the mix. Now I really like my flowers quite vibrant, and although these are almost getting there, as I have done several layers of the pink, I really just wanted to go in with some really intense pink ink into some of those areas, just to give them a little bit more depth and just to make some areas a little bit more vibrant. That is certainly a personal preference. You could have absolutely stopped with how it was looking after just using the taffy ink, but as you can see here, I'm adding tiny little bits of this ink on top, and on that petal I think I actually lose the orange altogether, so I do go back in there and I add some more orange in just to give that a little bit more variation, and because I really sort of took most of that orange out with the darker pink. So I'm continuing with that darker pink, particularly into those areas where I think it would the petal would sit back a little bit, and I think you can see that it does make a difference just to make some of those areas stand out a little bit more. This was actually a little bit of an experiment. I wasn't quite sure how well the dye ink would work over the top of the reactive inks, but I do think that it turned out pretty well in the end. And now that we're done with the watercolouring, I'm just going to add some little pieces of tape to that coordinating die, and I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine. So I've done that off camera, and I'm just going to pop out that flower, and I did watercolour the other one off camera, so I now have two ready to use. Okay, so it's time to move on to our background now. So this is the Zen Circles hot foil plate. I haven't used this yet, and I've been itching to use it, and I thought I would use it for the background to my flowers. Now this is Opal foil. This is one of my favourite foils. You can see there it's got a kind of pearlescent, iridescent look to it, but it works really, really well for adding a kind of tone-on-tone background to coloured cardstock. So I'm actually going to use it on some pitch black cardstock today, just taping that down with some yellow tape just to make sure that it stays in place while I go through the foiling process. My Glimmer hot foil machine has been heating up in the background, and the green light is now static, so that tells me it's hot enough for me to put my plate down on top. I've hit the timer button. When that stops flashing, I can then remove that platform from the base, run it through my die cutting machine, and my foiled panel will be ready. So just going to remove the tape from that. And this is the really fun part when you get to do the reveal, when you pull that foil off. So just going to lift that off, and you'll be able to see that beautiful pattern that the foil creates. So it's really, really pretty in real life. Now I do have a couple of areas on that where I have got some over foiling, so I'm just going to take a normal eraser, you can use a sand eraser, and just gently brush those off. I'm actually going to be cutting this panel down a little bit, so I'm taking a nesting rectangle infinity die. I'm going to place that down over the foiled panel and just tape it in place before I run it through my die cutting machine. So I actually tried foiling this plate using the opaque black Glimmer hot foil, and it really didn't show up well on the black cardstock, but I do think if you use the normal black Glimmer hot foil, that would probably work just as well as the Opal does. And now for our sentiment, I'm going back to the Here For You stamp set, and I'm going to stamp the Hello Friend onto some pitch black cardstock. So I've just popped a little panel into my MISTI. I've applied some anti-static powder onto it, and then I'm going to ink that up with some clear embossing and watermark ink. So just pressing that down, and I'm now applying some white detail embossing powder before I heat set that off camera. And I'm now going to just funnel that excess embossing powder back into the pot. So moving on now to cutting out that sentiment. I could have cut it out with a coordinating die, but I decided that I would use a circle infinity die instead. I thought that that would tie in really nicely with the circles in the background, and I always like a circular sentiment. So I've just put some tape onto that die, run it through my die cutting machine, and I'm now just popping that out. And we're now going to work on assembling our cards. So I've added some thin foam tape onto the back of my foiled panel. I'm removing the backing paper off that, and I'm going to go over each of those pieces of foam tape with some Precision Glue XL. This is just going to really help me when placing this down onto my card base. It's going to give me a little bit of extra time and wiggle room just to make sure that I've got that completely central before I press that down. And that is a card base that I've created from pitch black cardstock. And I'm now going to add on my flowers. So using Precision Glue XL again for these flowers, because this is a foiled panel, I want to make sure that these are really stuck down properly. So I am using the XL version of Precision Glue, and I do pop my Misty down on top just to make sure that those are really glued firmly before I go ahead and add my sentiment. And I'm adding that with some foam tape and again with a little bit of wet adhesive on top of that, just to make sure that I can position that completely correctly before I press that down. So that brings us to the end of my card for today. I do hope that you've enjoyed seeing the card come together. Don't rush off. As I mentioned at the start of the video, this is part of a video hop to celebrate the Hero Art Spring collections. There is a giveaway, so do check out the description in the description bar below and leave a comment for your chance to win. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you have a great day.